the 17th and 18th centuries as reflected in Paradise Lost and To Althea from Prison, presented by Colgan and Elena Klatt. Paradise Lost is an epic poem written by John Milton in 1667 and is also considered Christian mythology. Milton wrote Paradise Lost while he was in exile and while he lived in London. However, he wrote it after he became fully blind, so technically his daughters wrote it and he just recited it to them. During the time this poem was written, there were civil wars going on in London, and the Anglican Church was splitting, which both impacted his book. Oliver Cromwell, who Milton supported, overthrew King Charles I during the Civil War, and during this time, Milton served in a civil service position under Oliver Cromwell's protection. He issued pamphlets against Charles I and Charles II, and this forced him into exile after King Charles II became king and his followers were mad. The splitting of the Anglican Church was also going on at this time, and Milton became a Presbyterian, and these were people who wanted to get rid of the bishops in the church. However, Milton actually wanted to get rid of all priests. He called them hirelings. So he chose to break away from the Presbyterians and practiced a private religion that is similar to what we now know as Calvinism. This individual view of his Christianity actually made Paradise Lost a book that was considered both universal and personal. Features of Paradise Lost. There are 3 themes in Paradise Lost. The importance of obeying God, which is what really starts the story. Milton talks about Adam and Eve and how they chose to disobey God, and it compares them to Satan, where Adam and Eve are the path that humans should take because they repent, whereas Satan takes the path of downward spiraling into awfulness. So obviously we should be more like Adam and Eve. The second theme is the hierarchical nature of the universe, which talks about heaven being on the top, hell being on the bottom, and earth being on the middle. And when we sin, and when Adam and Eve sinned, it upset that hierarchy because it showed that they were trying to be better than God and do things that God didn't tell them to do. But again, so the third theme is the fall of man being somewhat fortunate. Because man, aka Adam and Eve, chose to sin, it gave God the ability to show his mercifulness and love for us and his willingness to forgive. So in a way, it was actually kind of a fortunate thing for us to do. Not good, but fortunate on behalf of God. So the stylistic devices and effects in Paradise Lost are blank verse, which is actually how the poem was written, and blank verse is when it doesn't rhyme. Symbolism, which is everyone in the book is in the poem is kind of symbolic. Like Adam and Eve are a symbol of how we should live, and Satan is how we should not live, etc. The allegories, which are mostly to the Bible, such as in the story of Adam and Eve, and the imagery, which kind of sets the scene. And the unified purpose, as according to John Milton, is to justify the way of God to men. The influences on Paradise Lost and the writing of it. The historical events, as I said before, are the Civil War and the splitting of the church, because the whole book is basically religious themed. The artistic works, so at this time, a lot of the older, more ancient epics and classic literature are being studied and honored, and Milton wanted to make an epic poem that was in English, so this was actually the first one in English. And obviously the Bible was a big influence. And then also the arising Presbyterian religion. To Althea from Prison is a lyrical poem written by Richard Lovelace in 1642. It was written while he was in prison in London, and he was a passionate supporter of King Charles I. However, he was imprisoned by the Puritans because the Parliament did not support King Charles I and therefore did not support Lovelace's ideas, so he wrote this poem while he was in prison. The features of this poem are the theme, which is no one can imprison the human mind. The stylistic devices and effects are alliteration, anaphora, metaphor, and paradox. So the alliteration and anaphora kind of help the poem to flow, and it gives this tone of freedom, which is kind of forms the paradox of the fact that this man who's writing it is imprisoned. And that's kind of the paradox of the whole thing, because he also writes about being a free man, and he's not one. So, yeah. And the unified purpose of this poem and these stylistic devices, it sends a message of freedom to those reading it, and it's all about mind over matter. So Lovelace had this idea that if you paid attention, if you tried, you can stop your mind from feeling trapped, and you can escape physical imprisonment. So even though he was imprisoned, he was still free in the mind. And that's what this poem represented. So the influences on this poem were the historic events of the restoration of the Anglican bishops. So Lovelace, unlike Milton, supported King Charles I, who liked the Anglican bishops and who wanted bishops in the church. The Civil War, where King Charles got overthrown and was later executed, and the Bishops' War, which was King Charles tried to force Scotland into having bishops as part of their ruling, and Scotland did not want this, so it became a war. And there was also a lot of famous people that he met that kind of influenced this, because at the time there was a lot of philosophy going around, and that kind of formed the idea of mind over matter, where you can't imprison the human mind. So the reflections and influences of these books on British life and culture. For Paradise Lost, at the time that he wrote this book and it was published, writers recognized how brilliant the epic was, especially not just necessarily the story, but the actual writing and how Milton used blank verse. This work and a lot of the other works of Milton were used as a source of knowledge for both literary and religious ideas, and it exerted a broad influence on the emerging literature of Romanticism. The effects on British life and culture of To Althea from Prison mostly was because Lovelace was a Cavalier poet, and a Cavalier poet is somebody who has a passionate allegiance to King Charles I, or who had a passionate allegiance to King Charles I, but also believed that the ideal Renaissance man should strive to be a wit, a lover, a soldier, a musician, and a writer of verses, and so much more. And they can do all this while fully engaging with the pleasures of life. So this was it really highlighted the Renaissance era mindset. And in the poem, it talks about being free and being in control of yourself. And this is kind of what the Renaissance, the perfect Renaissance man was. And this idea of mind over matter and the human mind not being able to be imprisoned was very philosophical, which was popular at this time and was becoming a new way of thinking. So common qualities between Paradise Lost and To Althea from Prison. So the 17th century marks a shift from the age of faith to the age of reason. And literature at this time represents the problems in society, religion, and the monarchy. Both Lovelace and Milton struggled with the Parliament at their time in England. So for Lovelace and Milton, they had very different beliefs, where Lovelace supported King Charles and supported bishops being in control, whereas Milton supported the Presbyterians and later his own religion that wanted to get rid of priests and bishops and everything. So they were different, but at the times that they wrote these books, they were both suffered from their beliefs. Lovelace was imprisoned because he wanted to get the bishops back in the church and in control, and he was in prison for it because the Parliament didn't like it. Felt like he needed to go into hiding because the Parliament and King Charles II had it out for him. The monarchy and society split, and the differences in religion that hurt the kingdom. Other literature in these centuries that also connect to Althea from Prison and Paradise Lost that kind of make the century what it is The Fire of London, which was issued in the London Gazette, and it's an article about the Great Fire of London. The Great Fire of London occurred shortly before Milton published his epic poem. A Cure for the Plague was another article. It talked about the plague spreading to London and people lying and about cures and all of these things, and it caused a lot of uprising in society. And The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan is an actual book written about the struggles of Christianity and being a Christian in this world. All of these books and articles and poems, including To Althea from Prison and Paradise Lost, just show the struggle during this time of living in this society and being able to be supported and having other people with your same mindset, because everybody wanted something different, which caused a lot of societal problems It marked this era and made it a very unique era.